He was at his letter writing again in the morning. The little desk at the window was black, rivaling the blackness of his fire escape, those rails dipped in asphalt, a heavy cosmetic coat of black rails, equidistant but appearing according to the rules of perspective. He had letters to write. He was busy, busy in pursuit of objects. He was only now and dimly beginning to understand. His first message today began half consciously as he was waking up, was to Monsignor Hilton, the priest who had brought Madeline into the church. Sipping his black coffee, Herzog in his cotton paisley robe narrowed his eyes and cleared his throat, already aware of the anger, the pervasive indignation he felt. The Monsignor should know what effect he had on the people he tampered with. I am the husband or ex-husband of a young woman whom you converted, Madeline Pontreter, the daughter of the well-known impresario. Perhaps you remember, she took instruction from you some years ago and was baptized by you. A recent Radcliffe graduate and very beautiful. Was Madeline really such a great beauty? Or did the loss of her make him exaggerate? Did it make his suffering more notable? Did it console him that a beautiful woman had dumped him? But she had done it for that loud, flamboyant, ass-clutching brute Gersbach. Nothing can be done about the sexual preferences of women. That's ancient wisdom. Nor of men. Quite objectively, however, she was a beauty. So was Daisy, in her time. I myself was once handsome, but spoiled my looks with conceit. Her complexion, healthy and pink, fine, dark hair, gathered in a bun behind and a fringe on her forehead, a slender neck, heavy blue eyes, and a Byzantine nose, which came straight down from the brow. The bangs concealed a forehead of considerable intellectual power, the will of a demon, or else outright mental disorder. She had a great sense of style. As soon as she began to take instruction, she bought crosses and medals and rosaries and suitable clothes, but then she was just a girl, really, just out of college. Still, I believe she understood many things better than I. And I want you to know, Monsignor, that I am not writing with the purpose of exposing Madeline or attacking you. I simply believe you may be interested to find out what may happen, or actually does happen, when people want to save themselves from, I suppose the word is nihilism? Now then, what does happen? What actually did happen? Herzog tried to understand, staring at the brick walls to which he had fled again from the vineyard. I had that room in Philadelphia, that one-year job, and I was commuting to New York 3 or 4 times a week on the Pennsylvania train to visit Marco. Daisy swore there would be no divorce, and for a time I was shacked up with Sono Oguchi. But she didn't answer my purpose. Not serious enough. I wasn't getting much work done. Routine classes in Philadelphia. They were bored with me and I with them. Papa got wind of my desolate life and was angry. Daisy wrote him all about it, but it was none of Papa's business. What actually happened? I gave up the shelter of an orderly, purposeful, lawful existence because it bored me, and I felt it was simply a slacker's life. Sono wanted me to move in with her, but I thought that would make me a squaw man, So I took my papers and books and my Remington office machine with the black hood and my records and oboe and music down to Philadelphia. Dragging back and forth on the train, wearing himself out the best sacrifice he could offer, he went to visit his little boy and face the anger of his ex-wife. Daisy would try to be stolid. It did great harm to her looks. She met Moses at the top of the stairs, her arms crossed, turning herself into a square figure with green eyes and chopped hair, waiting to say he must bring Marco home within 2 hours. He had a horror of these meetings. Of course, she always knew exactly what he was doing, whom he was seeing, and now and then would say, "How's Japan?" or "How's the Pope?" It was not funny. She had good qualities, but a sense of humor was not among them. Moses prepared for his outings with Marco. The time passed heavily otherwise. On the train, he memorized facts about the Civil War, dates, names, battles, so that while Marco was eating his hamburger at the zoo cafeteria, where they always went, they could talk. "Now it's time to tell you about Beauregard," he said. "This part is very exciting." But Herzog could only try to fix his mind on General Beauregard, or on Island Number 10, or Andersonville. He was thinking how to deal with Sono Aguki, whom he was deserting for Madeline. It felt like a desertion. The woman was waiting for him to call. He knew that. And he was often tempted, when Madeline was too busy with the church and refused to see him, to drop in and have a talk, and nothing more with Sono. This confusion was ugly, and he despised himself for creating it. Was this all the work a man could find or do? Losing self-respect, lacking clear ideas, he could see that Marco sympathized with his confused father. He played the game with Moses, asking more questions about the Civil War simply because it was all that he had to offer. The child could not reject his well-meant gift. There was love in that, thought Herzog, wrapped in his paisley cotton, his coffee turning cold. "These children and I love one another, but what can I give them?" Marco would look at him with clear eyes, his pale child's face, the Herzog face, freckled, his hair crew-cut, by his own choice, and somewhat alien. He had his grandmother Herzog's mouth. "Well, okay, kid. I've got to go back to Philadelphia now," said Herzog. He felt, on the contrary, nothing necessary about this return to Philadelphia. Philadelphia was entirely a mistake. What need was there to ride that train? Was it necessary, for instance, to see Elizabeth and Trenton? Were they waiting for him to look at them? Was his single cot in Philadelphia expecting him? It's just about train time, Marco. He pulled out his pocket watch, a gift 20 years ago from his father. "Take care on the subway, and around the neighborhood, too. Don't go down into Morningside Park. There are gangs down there." He repressed the impulse to dial Sono Oguku's number for a sidewalk booth and got on the subway instead, which carried him to Penn Station. In his long brown coat, tight in the shoulders, and misshapen by the books stuffed into the pockets, he walked the underground tunnel of shops. Flowers, cutlery, whiskey, donuts, and grilled sausages. The waxy chill of the orangeade. Laboriously, he climbed into the light-filled vault of the station. The great windows dustily divided the autumn sun, the stoop-shouldered sun of the garment district. The mirror of the gum machine revealed to Herzog how pale he was, unhealthy, wisps from his coat and wool scarf, his hat and brows twisting and flaming outward in the overfull light, and exposing the sphere of his face, the face of a man who was keeping up a front. Herzog smiled at this earlier avatar of his life, at Herzog the victim, Herzog the would-be lover, Herzog the man on whom the world depended for certain intellectual work, to change history, to influence the development of civilization. Several boxes of stale paper under his bed in Philadelphia were going to produce this very significant result. So, by the expanding iron gate, with its crimson plaque, lettered in gold, Herzog, holding his unpunched ticket, marched down to the train. His shoelaces were dragging. Ghosts of an old physical pride were still about him. On the lower level, the cars, smoky red, were waiting. Was he coming or going? At times, he didn't know. The books in his pockets were Pratt's short history of the Civil War and several volumes of Kierkegaard. Although he had given up tobacco, Herzog was still drawn to the smoker. He liked the fumes. Sitting in a dirty plush seat, he took out a book and read, "For dying means that it is all over, but dying the death means to experience death," trying to think what this might signify. If yes, no. On the other hand, if existence is nausea, then faith is an uncertain relief. Or else, be demolished by suffering, and you will feel the power of God as he restores you. Fine reading for a depressive. Herzog, at his desk, smiled. He let his head fall into his hands, almost silently laughing. But on the train he was laboriously studying, totally serious. All who live are in despair. Question mark. And that is the sickness unto death? Question mark. It is that a man refuses to be what he is? Question mark. He closed the book as the train reached the junk heaps of New Jersey. His head was hot. He found coolness by pressing the large Stevenson button on his lapel to his cheek. The smoke in the car was sweet, rotten, rich. He sucked it deep into his lungs. A stirring foulness, he rapidly breathed in the swampiness of old pipes. The wheels were speeding with a sharp racket, biting the rails. The cold fall sun flamed over the New Jersey mills, volcanic shapes of slag, rushes, dumps, refineries, ghostly torches, and presently the fields and woods. The short oaks bristled like metal. The fields turned blue. Each radio spire was like a needle's eye, with a drop of blood in it. The dull bricks of Elizabeth fell behind. At dusk, Trenton approached, like the heart of a coal fire. Herzog read the municipal sign. Trenton makes, the world takes. At nightfall, in a cold electric glitter, came Philadelphia. Poor fellow, his health was not good. Herzog was grinning as he thought of the pills he had taken and the milk he had drunk in the night. By his bed in Philadelphia there had often stood a dozen bottles. He sipped milk to calm his stomach. Living amid great ideas and concepts, insufficiently relevant to the present day-by-day American conditions. You see, Monsignor, if you stand on television in the ancient albs and surplices of the Roman Church, there are at least enough Irishmen, Poles, Croatians, watching in saloons to understand you, lifting elegant arms to heaven and glancing your eyes like a silent movie star. Richard Bartholomew or Conway Tyrrell. The R.C. working class takes great pride in him. But I, a learned specialist in intellectual history, handicapped by emotional confusion, resisting the argument that scientific thought has put into disorder all considerations based on value, convinced that the extent of universal space does not destroy human value, that the realm of facts and that of values are not eternally separated, and the peculiar idea entered my, in brackets, Jewish mind that we see about this, my life would prove a different point altogether. Very tired of the modern form of historicism which sees in this civilization the defeat of the best hopes of Western religion and thought, what Heidegger calls the second fall of man into the quotidian or ordinary. No philosopher knows what the ordinary is, has not fallen into it deeply enough. The question of ordinary human experience is the principal question of these modern centuries, as Montaigne and Pascal, otherwise in disagreement, both clearly saw. The strength of a man's virtue or spiritual capacity measured by his ordinary life. One way or another, the no doubt mad idea entered my mind that my own actions had historic importance, and this fantasy made it appear that people who harmed me were interfering with an important experiment. Herzog tragically sipping milk in Philadelphia, a frail, hopeful lunatic, tipping the carton to quiet his stomach and drown his unquiet mind, courting sleep. He was thinking of Marco, Daisy, Sano, Oguki, Madeline, the Puntriters, and now and then of the difference between ancient and modern tragedy according to Hegel, the inner experience of the heart and of the deepening of individual character in the modern age. His own individual character cut off at times both from facts and from values. But modern character is inconstant, divided, vacillating, lacking the stone-like certitude of archaic man, also deprived of the firm ideas of the 17th century, clear, hard theorems. Moses wanted to do what he could to improve the human condition, at last taking a sleeping pill to preserve himself, in the best interest of everyone. But when he met his Philadelphia class in the morning, he could hardly see his lecture notes. His eyes were swollen and his head asleep, but his anxious heart beat faster than ever. Madeline's father, a powerful personality, first-rate intelligence, many of the peculiar and grotesque vanities of theatrical New York in him, however, told me I might do her a great deal of good. He said, "Well, it's about time she quit hanging around with queers. She's like a lot of blue-stocking college girls. All her friends are homosexuals. She's got more faggots at her feet than Joan of Arc. It's a good sign that she's interested in you." But the old man also thought him a poor fish. The psychological fact was not concealed. He had come to see Pontriter in his studio. Madeline had said, "My father insists on having a talk with you. I wish you'd stop in." He found Pontriter dancing the samba or the cha-cha. Herzog didn't know from one from the other, with his own instructress, a middle-aged Filipino woman who had once belonged to a well-known tango team, Ramon and Adelina. Adelina had put on weight in the middle, but her long legs were thin. Her makeup didn't much lighten her dark face. Pontryter, this immense figure of a man with single white fibers growing from his tan scalp, he used a sun lamp all winter, was making tiny steps in his canvas rope-soled slippers. His seat-fallen trousers moved from side to side as he swayed his wide hips. His blue eyes were severe. The music played, sucking and knocking tiny, rapping, scraping, steel band rhythms. When it stopped, Pontryter said, with somewhat distant interest, "You, Moses Herzog?" "That's right." "In love with my daughter?" "Yes." "It isn't doing much for your health, I see." "I haven't been too well, Mr. Pontryter. Everyone calls me Fitz. This is Adelina. Adelina, Moses. He's laying my daughter. I thought I'd never live to see the day. Well, congratulations. Hope Sleeping Beauty will wake up." "Hello, guapo," said Adelina. There was nothing personal in this greeting. Adelina's eyes were concentrated on the lighting of her cigarette. She took a match from Pontryter's hand. Herzog remembered thinking how purely external that match game was, under the studio skylight. Artificial heat or none at all. Later, in the day, he had a talk with Tenny Pontryter, too. As Tenny spoke of her daughter, tears quickly came to her eyes. She had a smooth, long-suffering countenance, slightly tearful, even when she smiled, and most mournful when you met her by chance, as Moses did on Broadway, and saw her face. She was above the average height, coming toward him, large, smooth, kindly, with permanent creases of suffering beside her mouth. She invited him to sit with her in Verdi Square, the tattered grass plot, railed in and always surrounded by a seated throng of dying old men and women, and by begging cripples, lesbians, swaggering like truck drivers, and fragile Negro homosexuals with dyed hair and earrings. "I don't have much influence with my daughter," said Tenny. "I love her dearly, of course. It hasn't been easy. I had to stand by Fitz. He was blacklisted for years. I couldn't be disloyal. After all, he is a great artist." "I believe it," Herzog muttered. She had waited for him to accept this. "He's a giant," said Tenny. She had learned to say such things with utter conviction. Only a Jewish woman of a good culture-respecting background. Her father had been a tailor and a member of the Arbiter Ring. A Yiddishist could sacrifice her life to a great artist as she had done. In a mass society, she said, again. "He's a giant," said Tenny. She had learned to say such things with utter conviction. Only a Jewish woman of a good culture-respecting background. Her father had been a tailor and a member of the Arbiter Ring. A Yiddishist could sacrifice her life to a great artist, as she had done. In a mass society, she said. She looked at him still with the same sisterly gentleness and appeal. A money society. He wondered at this. Madeline had told him very bitter towards her parents that the old man needed 50,000 a year, and that he got it too, the old Svengali, out of women and stage-struck suckers. So Maddie thinks I let her down. She doesn't understand. Hates her father. I can tell you this, Moses. I think people most trust you instinctively. I see that Maddie does, and she's not a trusting girl, so I think she must be in love with you." "I am with her," said Moses emotionally. You must love her. I think you do. Things are so complicated. That I'm older, married? This is what you mean? You won't hurt her, will you? No matter what she thinks, I am her mother. I have a mother's heart, whatever she says. She began crying softly. Oh, Mr. Herzog, I'm always between the two of them. I know we haven't been conventional parents. She feels I just turned her out into the world, and there's nothing I can do. It's up to you. You'll have to give the child the only thing that can help her. Tenny took off her elaborate glasses, now making no effort to disguise her weeping. Her face, her nose reddened, and her eyes shaped to make what seemed to Moses a crooked appeal, darkened blindly with tears. There was a measure of hypocrisy and calculation in Tenny's method, but behind this, again, was real feeling for her daughter and her husband, and behind this real feeling there was something still more meaningful and somber. Herzog was all too aware of the layers upon layers of reality, loathsomeness, arrogance, deceit, and then, God help us all, truth as well. He understood he was being manipulated by Madeline's worried mother. 30 years the bohemian wife, the platitudes of that ideology, threadbare, cynically, exploited by old Pontryter. Tenny remained faithful, chained in the dull silver abstract jewelry that she wore. But it would never happen to her daughter if she could help it, and Madeline was just as determined that it should not. And this was where Moses came in, on the bench in Verdi Square. His face was shaven, his shirt was clean, his nails clean, his legs, somewhat heavy in the thighs, were crossed, and he listened to Tenny very thoughtfully, for a man whose mind had stopped working. It was too full of his grand projects to think anything clearly. Of course, he understood that Tenny was setting him up, and that he was a sucker for just the sort of appeal she made. He had a weakness for good deeds, and she flattered this weakness, asking him to save his headstrong, deluded child of hers. Patience, loving-kindness, and virility would accomplish this, but Tenny flattered him even more subtly. She was telling Moses that he could bring stability into the life of this neurotic girl and cure her by his steadiness. Among this crowd of the aged, dying, and crippled, Tenny, making her appeal to Moses for his help, stirred his impure sympathies intensely, repulsively. His heart felt sick. I adore Madeline, Tenny, he said. You don't have to worry. I'll do everything possible. An eager, hasty, self-intense, and comical person. Madeline had an apartment in an old building, and Herzog stayed with her when he was in town. They slept together on the studio sofa with the morocco cover. Moses pressed her body all night with fervor, exultation. She was not so fervent, but then she was a recent convert. Besides, one lover is always more moved than the other. Sometimes she had tears of anger and misery in her eyes, and complained of her sinfulness. Still, she wanted it too. At 7 in the morning, seeming to anticipate the alarm clock by a split second, she stiffened, and when it rang, she was already exclaiming with suffocated anger, "Damn!" and striding to the bathroom. The fixtures were old-fashioned in this place. These had been luxury apartments in the 1890s. The broad-mouthed faucets ran a shattering stream of cold water. She dropped her pajama top so that she was bare to the waist, and washed herself with a cloth. Purifying herself with angry vigor, her blue-eyed face growing red, her breasts pink, silent, barefooted, wearing his trench coat as a robe. Herzog came in and sat on the edge of the tub watching. The tiles were a faded cherry color, and the toothbrush rack and fixtures were ornate old nickel. The water stormed from the faucet, and Herzog watched as Madeline transformed herself into an older woman. She had a job at Fordham, and the first requirement to her mind was to look sober and mature, long in the church. His open curiosity, the fact that he familiarly shared the bathroom with her, his nakedness under the trench coat, his pallid morning face in the setting of disgraced Victorian luxury, it all vexed her. She did not look at him while making her preparations. Over her brassiere and slip she put a high-necked sweater, and to protect the shoulders of the sweater she wore a plastic cape. It kept the makeup from crumbling on the wood. Now she began to apply the cosmetics. The bottles and powders filled the shelves above the toilet. Whatever she did, it was with unhesitating speed and efficiency. Headlong, but with the confidence of an expert. Engravers, pastry cooks, acrobats, on the trapeze, worked in this manner. He thought she was too reckless at it, going too fast, about to have a spill, but that never happened. First she spread a layer of cream on her cheeks, rubbing it into her straight nose. Her childish chin and soft throat, it was gray, pearly, bluish stuff. That was the base. She fanned it with a towel. Over this she laid the makeup. She worked with cotton swabs under the hairline, about the eyes, up the cheeks, and on the throat. Despite the soft rings of feminine flesh, there was already something discernibly dictatorial about that extended throat. She would not let Herzog caress her face downward. It was bad for the muscles. Seated, watching on the edge of the luxurious tub, he put on his pants, tucked in his shirt. She took no notice of him. She was trying in some way to be rid of him as her daytime life began. She put on a pale powder with her puff, still at the same tilting speed, as if desperate. Then she turned swiftly to examine the work. Right profile, left profile, bracing at the mirror, holding her hands in as if to support her bust, but not actually touching it. She was satisfied with the powder. She put touches of Vaseline on her lids. She dyed the lashes with a tiny coil. Moses participated in all this intensely silently. Still, without pauses or hesitations, she put a touch of black in the outer corner of each eye, and redrew the line of her brows to make it level and earnest. Then she picked up a pair of large tailor's shears and put them to her bangs. She seemed to have no need to measure. Her image was fixed in her will. She cut as if discharging a gun, and Herzog felt an impulse of alarm short-circuited. Her decisiveness fascinated him, and in such fascination he discovered his own childishness. He, an able-bodied person seated on the edge of the pompous old tub, the enamel wreathed with hair-like twistings like cooked rhubarb, absorbed in this transformation of Madeline's face. She primed her lips with waxy stuff, then painted them a drab red, adding more years to her age. This waxen mouth just about did it. She moistened a finger on her tongue and brushed a few last touches on. That was it. She looked with level-browed gravity in the mirror and seemed satisfied. Yes, this was just right. She put on a long, heavy tweed skirt, which hid her legs. High heels tilted her ankles slightly, and now the hat. It was gray, with a low crown, wide-brimmed. When she drew it over her sleek head, she became a woman of 40, some white, hysterical, genuflecting hypochondriac of the church aisles. The wide brim over her anxious forehead, her childish intensity, her fear, her religious will, the pity of the whole thing. While he, the worn, unshaven, sinful Jew, endangering her redemption, his heart ached. But she barely gave him a glance. She had put on the jacket with the squirrel collar and was reaching under to adjust the shoulder pads. That hat! It was made like coiled basketry of one long gray tape, about half an inch wide, like the hat worn by the Christian lady who had read the Bible with him in the hospital ward in Montreal. The wind bloweth where it listeth, and thou hearest the sound thereof. There was even a hat pin. The job was finished. Her face was smooth and middle-aged. Only the eyeballs hadn't been touched, and the tears seemed about to spring from them. She looked angry, furious. She wanted him there at night. She would even, half with rancor, take his hand and put it on her breast as they were falling asleep. But in the morning she would have liked him to disappear. And he was not used to this. He was used to being a favorite. But he was dealing with a new female generation. That was what he told himself. To her, he was a fatherly, graying, patient seducer. He could not believe it. But the parts had been distributed. She had her white convert's face, and Herzog couldn't refuse to play opposite. "You should have some breakfast," he said. "No, it'll make me late." The paste had dried on her skin. She put on a big pectoral cross. She had been a Catholic for only 3 months, and already, because of Herzog, she couldn't be confessed. Not by Monsignor, anyway. Conversion was a theatrical event for Madeline. Theater, the art of upstarts, opportunists, would-be aristocrats. Monsignor himself was an actor. One role, but a fat one. Obviously, she had religious feeling, but the glamour and the social climbing were more important. You were famous for converting celebrities, and she went to you. Nothing but the best for our Maddie. The Jewish interpretation of the high-minded Christian lady or gentleman is a curious chapter in the history of social theater. The dignities continually replenished from below. Where would any distinguished person come from, if not the masses? With the devotion and fire of transcendent resentment, I don't deny that it did much for me as well. It reflected very favorably on me to be involved in such an issue. You'll get sick going to work on an empty stomach. Have breakfast with me, and I'll pay for your cab fare out to Fordham. Decisively, but awkwardly, she left the bathroom, her stride hampered by the long, ugly skirt. She wanted to fly, but with the cartwheel hat, the tweeds, the religious medals, the large pectoral cross, her heavy heart, getting off the ground was not easy. He trailed her through the mirror-paneled room, past framed prints of Flemish altarpieces, gilt green and red. The doorknobs, the locks were immobilized by many coats of paint. Madeline tugged impatiently. Herzog, coming up behind her, jerked open the white front door. They went down a corridor, where bags of garbage were put out on the once luxurious carpet, and down in the decayed elevator, out of the trapped air of the black shaft into the porphyry facade of the moldy lobby into the crowded street. "Aren't you coming?" "What are you doing?" said Madeline. Perhaps he was not yet fully awake. Herzog was loitering for a moment near the fish store, arrested by the odor. A thin, muscular Negro was pitching buckets of ground ice into the deep window. The fish were packed together, backs arched as if they were swimming in the crushed, smoking ice. Bloody bronze, slimy black green, gray gold. The lobsters were crowded to the glass, feelers bent. The morning was warm, gray, damp, fresh smelling of the river. Pausing on the metal doors of the sidewalk elevator, Moses received the raised pattern of the steel through his thin shoe soles, like Braille. But he did not interpret the message. The fish were arrested, lifelike, in the white, frothing ground ice. The street was overcast, warm and gray, intimate, unclean, flavored by the polluted river, the sexually stirring brackish tidal odor. "I can't wait for you, Moses," said Madeline, peremptory, over her shoulder. They went into the restaurant and sat at the yellow formica table. "What were you dawdling for?" "Well, my mother came from the Baltic provinces. She loved fish." But Madeline was not to be interested in Mother Herzog, 20 years dead. However mother-bound this nostalgic gentleman's soul might be. Moses' thinking ruled against himself. He was a fatherly person to Madeline. He couldn't expect her to consider his mother. She was one of the dead, without effect on the new generation. On the yellow-plated table was a red flower. The sharp dots of the blossom in the metal holder or choker sunk to the neck. Curious to know whether it was plastic too, Herzog touched it, finding it real. He quickly drew back his fingers. Madeline was watching. "You know, I'm in a hurry," she said. She was fond of English muffins. She ordered them. She called after the waitress. "Tear mine. Please don't slice them." She tilted her chin to Moses, then, and said, "Moses, is my makeup on all right? On my neck? With your complexion, you don't need any of this. But is it ragged?" "No. Am I going to see you later?" "I'm not sure. I've been invited for cocktails out at Fordham for one of the missionaries. But afterwards, I can catch a late train to Philly." "I promised Mother. She's having trouble again with the old man." "I thought it was all settled. Divorce." "She's such a slave," said Madeline. "She can't let go, and neither will be. It's to his advantage. She still goes to that rotten acting school after hours and keeps his books. He's the great thing in her life. Another Stanislavski. She sacrificed herself, and if he's not a great genius, what was it all for? Therefore, he is a great genius. I've heard people say what a brilliant director he was. He has something," said Madeline, "almost a female kind of insight. And he drugs people. It's evil the way he does it. Tenny says he spends about $50,000 a year just on himself alone. He uses all his genius to burn that money." "It sounds to me as though she's keeping his books for your sake, trying to save what she can for you. He'll leave nothing but lawsuits and debts. She set her teeth in the toasted muffin. They were girlish short, but then she did not eat. She put the muffin down, and her eyes filled in their strange manner. "What's wrong? Eat." She pushed away the plate, however, I asked you not to phone me up at Fordham. It upsets me. I have to keep the two things separate. I'm sorry, I won't. I've been beside myself. I'm ashamed to go to Monsignor for confession. Won't another priest do? She put down her cup with a sharp crack of clumsy restaurant china. A pale lipstick mark was on the rim. The last priest bawled hell out of me about you. He asked how long had I been in the church. Why was I baptized if I was going to act like this within a few months? The great eyes of the middle-aged woman she had made herself up to be accused him. Across her white face were the straight brows she had given herself. He thought he could see the true outline beneath. God, I'm sorry, said Moses. He looked contrite. I don't want to make trouble. This was certainly untrue. On the contrary, he was bent on making trouble. He thought difficulty was the whole object. She wanted Moses and the Monsignor to struggle over her. It heightened the sexual excitement. He fought her apostasy in the sack. And certainly the Monsignor made female converts with his burning eyes. I feel miserable. Miserable, she said. It'll be Ash Wednesday soon, and I can't take communion till I confess. That's awkward. Moses really did sympathize with her, but he wouldn't offer to bow out. And what about marriage? How can we marry? Things can be worked out. The church is a Things can be worked out. The church is a wise old institution. At the office, they talk about Joe DiMaggio when he wanted to marry Marilyn Monroe, and the Tyrone Power case. One of his last marriages was performed by a prince of the church. The other day there was another thing in Leonard Leon's about Catholic divorces. Madeline read all the gossip columnists, her bookmarks in St. Augustine, and in her missal were clippings from the Post and Mirror. Missile? What? Anyway. Favorable? Asked Moses, doubling his muffin over and pressing it. It was buttered too quickly. Madeline's large, violent eyes seemed swollen. Her thoughts were stained with these difficulties, many times analyzed. I have an appointment with an Italian priest in the Society for the Propagation of the Faith. He's a canon law expert. I phoned him yesterday. In the church, 12 weeks, she already knew everything. It would be easier if Daisy would divorce me, said Herzog. She's got to give you a divorce. Madeline's voice rose sharply. Herzog found himself looking at the face, which had been prepared for the Jesuits uptown. But something had happened. Some string had tightened and twisted in her breast, and her figure grew rigid. Her fingertips whitened as she pressed the edge of the table and glared at him, her lips thinning, and the color darkening under the tubercular pallor of her makeup. Her fingertips whitened as she pressed the edge of the edge of the table and glared at him, her lips thinning and the color darkening under the tubercular pallor of her makeup. What makes you think I intend to have a lifelong affair with you? I want some action. But Maddie, you know how I feel. Feel? Don't give me that line of platitudes about feelings. I don't believe in it. I believe in God, sin, death, so don't pull any sentimental crap on me. No, now listen. He put on his fedora, as if he hoped to derive some authority from it. I want to be married, she said. This other stuff is just balls. My mother had to live a bohemian life. She worked while Pontreter carried on. He bribed me with nickels when I saw him with one of his broads. You know how I learned my ABCs? From Lenin's State and Revolution. Those people are insane. Probably so, Herzog mentally agreed. But now Madeline wants white Christmases and Easter bunnies, and to live perhaps in one of those streets of brick, semi-detached, parochial houses in the dull wilderness of Queensborough, fussing over communion dresses with a steady Irish husband who sweeps up the crumbs at the biscuit factory. Maybe I have become a fanatic about conventional things, said Madeline. But I won't have it any other way. You and I have got to marry in the church. Otherwise, I quit. Our children will be baptized and brought up in the church. Moses gave a dumb half nod. Compared with her, he felt static, without temperament. The powdered fragrance of her face stirred him. My gratitude for art was his present reflection, any sort of art. My childhood was a grotesque nightmare, she went on. I was bullied, assaulted, she stammered. Abused? She nodded. She had told him this before. He could not bring this sexual secret of hers to light. It was a grown man, she said. He paid me to keep it quiet. Who was he? Her eyes were sullenly full, and her pretty mouth desperately vengeful but silent. It happens to many, many people, he said. Can't base a whole life on that. It doesn't mean that much. Would a whole year of amnesia not mean much? My 14th year is blacked out. She couldn't accept this broad-minded consolation from Herzog. Perhaps it seemed to her a kind of indifference. My parents damn near destroyed me. All right, it doesn't matter now, she said. I believe in my Savior, Jesus Christ. I'm not afraid of death now, Moses. Pon said we all died and rotted in the grave, saying that to a girl of 6 or 7. He ought to be punished for it. But now I'm willing to go on living and to bring children into the world, provided that I have something to tell them when they ask me about death and the grave. But don't expect me to go along in the ordinary loose way without rules. No, it'll be these rules or nothing. Moses watched her as though he were submerged through the vitreous distortion of deep water. Do you hear me? Oh, yes, he said. Yes, I do. I've got to go now. Father Francis is never a minute late. She picked up her handbag and hurried away, her cheeks shaken by the abruptness of her steps. She wore very high heels. Rushing into the subway, on one of those mornings, she caught a heel in the hem of her skirt and fell, injuring her back. She limped up to the street and took a taxi to the office, but Father Francis sent her to the doctor, who tapped her heavily and told her to go home. Taped her heavily and told her to go home. Tapped her. There she found Moses, still half dressed, having a thoughtful cup of coffee. He was thinking continually, but nothing clear resulted. Help me, Madeline said. What happened? I fell in the subway. I'm hurt. Her voice was piercing. You'd better lie down, he said. He unpinned her hat and carefully unbuttoned her jacket and sweater, took off her skirt and slip. The clear pink color of her body was disclosed below the makeup line at the base of her neck. He took off the pectoral cross. Get my pajamas. She was shivering. The broad tapes had a strongly medicated smell. He led her to the bed and lay down with her to warm and comfort her, just as she wanted him to. There was a March snow that grimy day. He did not go back to Philadelphia. I punished myself for my sins, Madeline repeated. I thought it might interest you to learn the true history of one of your converts, Monsignor. Ecclesiastical dolls, gold-threaded petticoats, whining organ pipes, the actual world, to say nothing of the infinite universe, demanded a sterner, a real masculine character. Like whose? Thought Herzog. Mine, for instance? And instead of concluding this letter to Monsignor, he wrote out, for his own use, one of June's favorite nursery rhymes. I love little pussy, her coat is so warm, and if I don't hurt her, she'll do me no harm. I'll sit by the fire and give her some food, and pussy will love me because I am good. That's more like it, he thought. Yes, you must aim the imagination also at yourself, point blank. But when all is said and done, Madeline didn't marry in the church, nor did she baptize her daughter. Catholicism went the way of zithers and tarot cards, bread baking and Russian civilization, and life in the country. With Madeline, Herzog had made his second attempt to live in the country. For a big city Jew, he was peculiarly devoted to country life. He had forced Daisy to endure a freezing winter in eastern Connecticut while he was writing Romanticism and Christianity, in a cottage where the pipes had to be thawed with candles and freezing blasts penetrated the clapboard walls while Herzog brooded over his rousseau or practiced on the oboe. The instrument had been left to him at the death of Alec Hirschbein, his roommate at Chicago, and Herzog, with his odd sense of piety, much heavy love in Herzog, grief did not pass quickly with him, taught himself to play the instrument, and, come to think of it, the sad music must have oppressed Daisy even more than the months of cold fog. Perhaps Marco's character had been affected by the experience, too. At times, he showed a streak of melancholy. But with Madeline, it was going to be altogether different. She dropped from the church, and after a struggle with Daisy and her lawyers and his own, and under pressure from Tenny and Madeline, Moses was divorced and remarried. The wedding supper was cooked by Phoebe Gersbach. Herzog, at his desk, gazing at great scrolls of cloud, the sky unusually clear for New York, remembered the Yorkshire pudding and the homemade cake. Phoebe baked incomparable banana cakes, light, moist, white icing. A doll bride and groom, and Gersbach, boisterous, yucking it up, poured whiskey, wine, pounded the table, danced, stumping with the bride. He wore one of his father's favorite loose sport shirts, which opened on his big chest and slipped away from his shoulders softly. Male décolleté. There were no other guests. The house in Ludeville was bought when Madeline became pregnant. It seemed the ideal place to work out the problems Herzog had become involved with in the phenom- phenomenology. It seemed the ideal place to work out the problems Herzog had become involved with in the phenomenology of mind, the importance of the law of the heart in Western traditions, the origins of moral sentimentalism, and related matters on which he had distinctly different ideas. He was going, he smiled secretly now, admitting it, to wrap the subject up, to pull the carpet from under all other scholars, show them what was what, stun them, expose their triviality once and for all. It was not simple vanity, but a sense of responsibility that was the underlying motive. That he would say for himself, he was a bien pensant type. He took seriously Heinrich Heine's belief that the words of Rousseau had turned into a bloody machine of Robespierre and Kant and Fichte were deadlier than armies. He had a small foundation grant, and his $20,000 legacy from Father Herzog went into the country place. He turned into its caretaker. 20,000 and more would have gone down the drain if he hadn't thrown himself into the work. Papa's savings represented 40 years of mystery in America. I don't understand how it was possible, thought Herzog. I was in a fever when I wrote the check. I didn't even look. But after the papers were signed, he inspected the house, as if for the first time. It was unpainted, gloomy, with rotting Victorian ornaments. Nothing on the ground floor but a huge hole like a shell crater. The plaster was coming down, moldy, thready. Sickening stuff hung from the lathes. The old-fashioned knob and tube wiring was dangerous. Bricks were dropping from the foundations. The windows leaked. Herzog learned masonry, glazing, plumbing. He sat up nights studying the do-it-yourself encyclopedia. And with hysterical passion, he painted, patched, tarred gutters, plastered holes. 2 coats of paint counted for nothing on old, open-grained wood. In the bathroom, the nails hadn't been set, and their heads worked through the vinyl tiles, which came loose like playing cards. The gas radiator was suffocating. The electric heater blew fuses. The tub was a relic. It rested on 4 metal talons, toy-like. You had to crouch in it and sponge yourself. Still, Madeline had come back from Sloane's bath shop with luxurious fixtures, scallop shell silver soap dishes and bars of Eczosan soap, thick Turkish towels. Herzog worked in the rusty slime of the toilet tank, trying to get the cock and ball to work. At night, he heard the trickle that was exhausting the well. A year of work saved the house from collapse. In the cellar was another lavatory with thick walls like a bunker. In summer, the crickets liked it best, and so did Herzog. Here he loitered over a 10-cent bargain, Dryden and Pope. Through a chink, he saw the fiery morning of high summer, the wicked, spiny green of vines, and the tight, shapely heads of wild roses. The huge elm in front, dying on him, the oriole's nest, gray and heart-shaped. He read, "I am His Highness's dog at Kew." But Herzog had a touch of arthritis in his neck. The stony cell became too damp. He removed the top of the tank with a grating noise and pulled the rubber fitting to release the water. The parts were rusty, stiff. His Highness's dog at Q. Pray tell me, sir, whose dog are you? Mornings he tried to reserve for brain work. He corresponded with the Widener Library to try to get the Abhandlungen der Königlich Schichten Gesellschaft der Wissenschaft. His desk was covered with unpaid bills, unanswered letters. To raise money, he took on hack work. University presses sent manuscripts for his professional judgment. They lay in bundles, unopened. The sun grew hot. The soil was damp and black. And Herzog looked with despair on the thriving, luxuriant life of the plants. He had all this paper to get through and no help. The house was waiting, huge, hollow, urgent. Quo volt perdere dementant, he lettered in dust. The gods were working on him, but they hadn't demented him enough yet. In commenting on monographs, Moses very hand rebelled. 5 minutes at a letter, and he got writer's cramp. His look turned wooden. He was running out of excuses. I regret the delay. A bad case of poison ivy has kept me from my desk. Elbows on his papers, Moses stared at half-painted walls, discolored ceilings, filthy windows. Something had come over him. He used to be able to keep going, but now he worked at about 2% of efficiency, handled every piece of paper 5 or 10 times, and misplaced everything. It was too much. He was going under. He picked up the oboe. In his dark study, vines clutching the bulging screen, Herzog played Handel and Purcell, jigs, bourrées, contradances. His face puffed out, fingers fleet on the keys. The music, hopping and tumbling, absent-minded and sad. Below, the washing machine ran, 2 steps clockwise, 1 step counter. The kitchen was foul enough to breed rats. Egg yolks dried on the plates, coffee turned green in the cups, toast cereal, maggots breeding in marrow bones, fruit flies, house flies, dollar bills, postage stamps and trading stamps soaking on the formica counter. Madeline, to get away from his music, slammed the screen door, slammed the car door. The motor roared. The Studebaker had a split in the muffler. She started down the slope. Unless you remembered to bear right, the tailpipe would scrape on the rocks. Herzog played softer as he waited for the sound. That muffler would come off one of these days. But he had stopped mentioning it to her. He had too many subjects of this sort. They made her angry. Through a cover of honeysuckle that bent the screen inward, he watched for her to reappear on the second curve of the slope. Pregnancy had thickened her features, but she was still beautiful. Such beauty makes men breeders, studs, and servants. As she drove, her nose worked involuntarily under the sight-obscuring fringe of her hair. all part of the process of steering. Her fingers, some elegant, some nail-bitten, gripped the agate steering wheel. He declared it was unsafe for a pregnant woman to drive. When she was gone, he dried the oboe, looked over the reeds, shut the frowsy plush case. He wore field glasses about his neck. Once in a while he tried to examine a bird. Usually it was gone before he could get it in focus. Abandoned, he sat at his desk, a flush door on wrought iron legs. Philodendrons grew from the base of his lamp, twining about the iron. With a rubber band he shot wads of paper at the horseflies on the paint-streaked windows. He was not a skillful painter. He tried a spray gun at first, attaching it to the rear of the vacuum cleaner. A very efficient blower. Muffled in rags to protect the lungs, Moses sprayed ceilings, but the gun speckled the windows and banisters, and he went back to the brush. Dragging the ladder and buckets and rags and thinners, scraping with his putty knife, he patched and painted, reaching left, right, above, this stretch, beyond, way out, to the corner, to the molding, his taut hand trying to achieve a straight line, laying paint on in big strokes or in an agony of finesse. Spattered and streaming sweat, when the frenzy wore off, he went into the garden, stripped naked. He fell in the hammock. Meanwhile, Madeline toured the antique shops with Phoebe Gersbach, or brought some loads of groceries from the Pittsfield supermarkets. Moses was continually after her about money. Beginning his reproaches, he tried to keep his voice low. It was always something trivial that set him off. A bounced check, a chicken that had rotted in the icebox, a new shirt torn up for rags. Gradually, his feelings became very fierce. When are you going to stop bringing home this junk, Madeline? These busted commodes, these spinning wheels. We have to finish the place. I can't stand these empty rooms. Where's all the dough going? I'm working myself sick. He felt black with rage inside. I pay the bills. What do you think I do it with? You said you had to learn to handle money. No one ever trusted you. Well, you're being trusted now, and the checks are bouncing. The dress shop just phoned. Millie Crozier. $500 on a maternity outfit. Who's going to be born? Louis Quatorze? Who's going to be born? Louis Quatorze? Yes, I know your darling mother wore flour sacks. You don't need a Park Avenue obstetrician. Phoebe Gersbach used the Pittsfield Hospital. How can I get you to New York from here? It's 3.5 hours. We'll go 10 days before. What about all this work? You can carry your Hegel to the city. You haven't cracked a book in months anyway. The whole thing is a neurotic mess. These bushels of notes, it's grotesque how disorganized you are. You're no better than any other kind of addict, sick with abstractions. Curse Hegel, anyway, and his crappy old house. And this crappy old house. I need 4 servants, and you want me to do all the work. Herzog made himself dull by repeating what was right. He was maddening, too. He realized it. He appeared to know how everything ought to go, down to the smallest detail, under the category of free concrete mind, misapprehension of universal
by the developing consciousness reality opposing the law of the heart, alien necessity gruesomely crushing individuality, un, unsoeter. Oh, Herzog granted that he was in the wrong, but all he asked, it seemed to him, was a bit of cooperation in his effort, benefiting everyone, to work toward a meaningful life. Hegel was curiously significant, but also utterly cockeyed. Of course, that was the whole point. Simpler and without such elaborate metaphysical rigmarole was Spinoza's prop. 307. Man's desire to have others rejoice in the good in which he rejoices, not to make others live according to his way of thinking. Ex ipsius ingenio. Herzog, mulling over these ideas as he all alone painted his walls in Ludeville, building Versailles as well as Jerusalem in the green hot Berkshire summers. Time and again he was brought down from the ladder to the telephone. Madeline's checks were bouncing. "Jesus Christ," he cried out. "Not again, Maddie." She was ready for him in a bottle green maternity blouse and knee-length stockings. She was becoming very stout. The doctor had warned her not to eat candy. On the sly, she greedily devoured enormous Hershey bars, the 30-cent size. "Can't you add? There's not a damn reason in the world for these checks to come back." Moses glared at her. "Oh, here we go with this same petty stuff. It's not petty. It's damn serious. I suppose you'll start on my upbringing now, my lousy freeloading bohemian family, all chiselers. And you gave me your good name. I know this routine backwards. Do I repeat myself? Well, so do you, Madeline, with these checks. Spending your dead father's money. Dear Daddy, that's what you choke on. Well, he was your father. I don't ask you to share my horrible father, so don't try to force your old man down my throat." "We've got to have a little order in these surroundings," Madeline said quickly, firmly, and accurately. "You'll never get the surroundings you want. Those are in the 12th century somewhere. Always crying for the old home and the kitchen table with the oilcloth on it and your Latin book. Okay, let's hear your sad old story. Tell me about your poor mother, and your father, and your brother and the drunkard, and the old synagogue and the bootlegging and your Aunt Zipporah." "Oh, what balls." "As if you didn't have a past of your own. Oh, balls." "So now we're going to hear how you saved me. Let's hear it again. What a frightened puppy I was. How I wasn't strong enough to face life. But you gave me love from your big heart and rescued me from the priest. Yes, cured me of menstrual cramps by servicing me so good. You saved me. You sacrificed your freedom. I took you away from Daisy and your son and your Japanese screw. Your important time and money and attention." Her wild blue glare was so intense that her eyes seemed twisted. "Madeline!" "Oh, shit. Just think a minute." "Think? What do you know about thinking?" "Maybe I married you to improve my mind," said Herzog. "I'm learning." "Well, I'll teach you. Don't worry," said the beautiful, pregnant Madeline between her teeth. Herzog noted, from a favorite source, "Opposition is true friendship. His house, his child, yea, all that a man hath, will he give for wisdom." The husband, a beautiful soul, the exceptional wife, the angelic child, and the perfect friends all dwelt in the Berkshires together. The learned professor sat at his studies. Oh, he had really been asking for it, because he insisted on being the ingenue whose earnestness made his own heart flutter. Zisse en Chameli, a sweet little soul, Tenny had called Moses, at 40 to earn such a banal reputation. His forehead grew wet. Such stupidity deserved harsher punishment. A sickness, a jail sentence. Again, he was only being lucky. Ramona, food and wine, invitations to the seashore. Still, extreme self-abuse was not really interesting to him either. It was not the most relevant thing. Not to be a fool might not be worth the difficult alternatives. Anyway, who was that non-fool? Was it the power lover who bent the public to his will? The scientific intellectual who administered a budget of billions? Clear eyes, a hard head, a penetrating political intelligence, the organizational realist? Now, wouldn't it be nice to be one? But Herzog worked under different orders, doing, he trusted, the work of the future, the revolutions of the 20th century, the liberation of the masses by production, created private life, but gave nothing to fill it with. This was where such as he came in. The progress of civilization, indeed, the survival of civilization, depended on the success of Moses E. Herzog. And in treating him, as he did, Madeline injured a great project. This was in the eyes of Moses E. Herzog. What was so grotesque and deplorable about the experience of Moses E. Herzog? A very special sort of lunatic expects to inculcate his principles. Sandor Himmelstein, Valentin Gersbach, Madeline P. Herzog, Moses himself. Reality instructors. They want to teach you, to punish you with the lessons of the real. Moses, a collector of pictures, had kept a photograph of Madeline, aged 12, in riding habit. She was posed with the horse, about to mount, a stocky, long-haired girl with fat wrists and desperate dark shadows under her eyes, premature signs of suffering and of a craving for revenge. In jodhpurs boots and bowler, she had the hauteur of the female child who knows it. Won't be long before she is nubile and has the power to hurt. This is mental politics. The strength to do evil is sovereignty. She knew more at 12 than I did at 40. Now Daisy had been a very different sort of person, cooler, more regular, a conventional Jewish woman. Herzog had photographs of her, too, in his footlocker, under the bed, but there was no need to examine pictures. He could evoke her face at will, slant green eyes, large ones, kinky, golden but lustrous hair, a clear skin. Her manner was shy, but also rather stubborn. Without difficulty, Herzog saw her as she had appeared on a summer morning beneath the E.L. on 51st Street. Chicago, a college student with grimy texts. Park and Burgess. Ogburn and Nimcoff. Her dress was simple, thin-striped, green and white seersucker, square at the neck. Beneath its laundered purity, she had small white shoes, bare legs, and her hair was held at the top by a barrette. The red streetcar came from the slums to the west. It clanged, swayed, wallowed, its trolley shedding thick green sparks, tatters of paper flying in its wake. Moses had stood behind her on a carbolic, reeking platform when she gave her transfer slip to the conductor. From her bare neck and shoulders he inhaled the fragrance of summer apples. Daisy was a country girl, a Buckeye who grew up near Zenithville. She was childishly systematic about things. It sometimes amused Moses to recall that she had a file card clumsily printed out to cover every situation. Her awkward form of organization had had a certain charm. When they were married, she put his pocket money in an envelope in a green metal file, bought for budgeting. Daily reminders, bills, concert tickets were pinned by thumbtacks to the bulletin board. Calendars were marked well in advance. Stability, symmetry, order, containment were Daisy's strength. Dear Daisy, I have a few things to say to you. By my irregularity and turbulence of spirit, I brought out the very worst in Daisy. I caused the seams of her stockings to be so straight and the buttons to be buttoned symmetrically. I was behind those rigid curtains and underneath the square carpets. Roast breasts of veal every Sunday, with bread stuffing, like clay, was due to my disorders, my huge involvement, huge but evidently formless, in the history of thought. She took Moses' word for it that he was seriously occupied. Of course, a wife's duty was to stand by this puzzling and often disagreeable Herzog. She did so with heavily neutrality, recording her objections each time once but not more. The rest was silence, such heavy silence as he felt in Connecticut, when he was finishing Romanticism and Christianity. The chapter on romantics and enthusiasts nearly did him in. It almost ended them both. The enthusiastic reaction against the scientific mode of suspending belief intolerable to the expressive needs of certain temperaments. Here Daisy picked up and left him alone in Connecticut. She had to go back to Ohio. Her father was dying. Moses read the literature of enthusiasm in his cottage by the small, nickel-trimmed kitchen stove, wrapped in a blanket like an Indian. He listened to the radio, debated the pros and cons of enthusiasm with himself. It was a winter of rock-like ice, the pond like a slab of halite, green, white, resonant ice, bitterly ringing underfoot. The trickling mill dam froze in twisting pillars. The elms' giant harp shapes made cracking noises. Herzog, responsible to civilization in his icy outpost, lying in bed in an aviator's helmet. When the stoves were out, fitted together, Bacon and Locke from one side, and Methodism and William Blake from the other. His nearest neighbor was a clergyman, Mr. Idwal. Idwal's automobile, a Model A Ford, was running when Herzog's whippet had frozen solid. They drove to the market together. Mrs. Idwal made graham cracker pies filled with chocolate gelatin and left them neighborly on Moses's table. He returned from his solitary walks on the pond in the woods and found pies in big Pyrex plates on which he warmed his numb cheeks and fingertips. In the morning, eating gelatin pie for breakfast, he saw Idwal, ruddy and small, with steel spectacles, in his bedroom swinging Indian clubs, doing knee bends in his long underwear. His wife sat in her parlor, hands folded, the spidery design of lace curtains thrown on her face by sunlight. Moses was invited to play his oboe, accompanying Mrs. Idwal, who played a melodeon, on Sunday evenings while the farm families sang hymns. And were they farmers? No, they were the country poor, odd job people. The little parlor was hot, the air bad, the hymns pierced with Jewish melancholy by Moses and his reeds. His relations with the Reverend and Mrs. Idwal were excellent until the minister started to give him testimonials by Orthodox rabbis who had embraced the Christian faith. The photos of these rabbis in fur hats, bearded, were put down with the pies. The large eyes of those men, and especially their lips thrust out from fuming beards, began to seem crazy to Moses, and he thought it time to get away from the snowbound cottage. He was afraid for his own sanity, living like this, especially after the death of Daisy's father. Moses thought he saw him, met him in the woods, and when he opened doors he encountered his father-in-law, vivid and characteristic, waiting by a table or sitting in the bathroom. Herzog made a mistake of rejecting Idwal's rabbis. The clergyman was keener than ever to convert him, and dropped in every afternoon for theological discussions until Daisy returned. Sad, clear-eyed, mostly mute, resident. But a wife and the child. The thaws began, ideal for making snowmen. Moses and Markel lined the drive with them. Little anthracite eyes glittered even by starlight. In spring, and the blackness of night was filled with shrilling cheepers. Herzog's heart began to warm toward the country. The blood-colored sunsets of winter and solitude were behind him. They didn't seem so bad now that he had survived them. Survival, he noted, till we figure out what's what, till the chance comes to exert a positive influence. Personal responsibility for history, a trait of Western culture, rooted in the Testaments, old and new, the idea of the continual improvement of human life on this earth. What else explained Herzog's ridiculous intensity? Lord, I ran to fight in the holy cause, but kept tripping, never reached the scene of the struggle. He saw through this as well. If nothing else, he was too rich in diseases to be satisfied with such a description. From the middle height of New York, looking down, seeing lunchtime crowds like ants upon smoked glass. Herzog, wrapped in his wrinkled robe and sipping cold coffee, set apart from daily labor for greater achievements, but at present without confidence in his calling, tried now to again get back to work. Dear Dr. Mossbach, I am sorry you are not satisfied with my treatment of T.E. Holm and his definition of Romanticism as split religion. There is something to be said for his view. He wanted things to be clear, dry, spare, pure, cool, and hard. With this, I think we can sympathize. I, too, am repelled by the dampness, as he called it, and the swarming of romantic feelings. I see what a villain Rousseau was, and how degenerate. I do not complain that he was ungentlemanly. It ill becomes me. But I do not see what we can answer when he says, Je sens mon coeur, et je connais les hommes. Bottled religion on conservative principles. Does that intend to deprive the heart of such powers? Do you think? Holmes' followers made sterility their truth, confessing their impotence. This was their passion. Still fighting it out, Herzog was fairly deadly in polemics. His polite formulas often carried much spleen. His docile ways, his modest conduct. He didn't deceive himself. the certainty of being right, a flow of power rose in his bowels and burned in his legs. Queer, the luxurious victories of anger. There was passionate satire in Herzog. Still, he knew that the demolition of error was not it. He began to have a new horror of winning, of the victories of untrammeled autonomy. Man has a nature, but what is it? Those who have confidently described it, Hobbes, Freud, etc., by telling us what we are intrinsically, are not our greatest benefactors. This is true also for Rousseau. I sympathize with Holmes' attack on the introduction by the Romantics of perfection into human things, but do not like his narrow repressiveness either. Modern science, least bothered with the definition of human nature, knowing only the activity of investigation, achieves its profoundest results through an anonymity recognizing only the brilliant functioning of intellect. Such truth as it finds may be nothing to live by, but perhaps a moratorium on definitions of human nature is now best. Herzog abandoned this theme with characteristic abruptness. Dear Nachum, he wrote, I know it was you I saw on the 8th Street last Monday, running away from me. Herzog's face darkened. It was you, my friend nearly 40 years ago, playmates on Napoleon Street, the Montreal slums. In a beatnik cap on the razzle-dazzle street of lion-bearded homosexuals wearing green eye paint, there suddenly was Herzog's childhood playmate. A heavy nose, hair white, thick, unclean glasses. The stooped poet took one look at Moses and ran away. On gaunt legs, under urgent pressure, he fled to the other side of the street. He turned up his collar and stared into the window of the cheese shop. Nachum, did you think I'd ask for the money you owe me? I wrote that off long ago. It meant very little to me in Paris after the war. I had it then. Nachum had come to Europe to write poetry. He was living in the Arab slum on Rue Street Jacques. Herzog was installed in comfort on the Rue Marbouf. Wrinkled and dirty, Nachman, his nose red from weeping, his creased face, the face of a dying man, appeared at Herzog's door one morning. What's happened? Moses, they've taken my wife away, my little Laura. Wait a minute, what's up? Herzog was perhaps a little cold, then repelled by such excesses. Her father, the old man from the floor-covering business, spirited her away, the old sorcerer. She'll die without me. The child can't bear life without me. And I can't live without her. I've got to get back to New York. Come in, come in. We can talk in this lousy hallway. We can't talk in this lousy hallway. Nachman entered the little drawing room. It was a furnished apartment in the style of the 20s, spitefully correct. Nachman seemed hesitant to sit down in his gutter-stained pants. I've been to all the lines already. There's space on the Hollandia tomorrow. Lend me dough or I'm ruined. You're my old friend in Paris. Honestly, I thought you'd be better off in America. Nachman and Laura had been wandering up and down Europe, sleeping in ditches in the Rimbaud country, reading Van Gogh's letters aloud to each other. Rilke's poems. Laura was not too strong in the head either. She was thin, soft-faced, the corners of her pale mouth turned down. She caught the flu in Belgium. I'll pay you every penny. Nachman wrung his hands. His fingers had grown knobby, rheumatic. His face was coarse slack from illness, suffering, and absurdity. I felt it would be cheaper in the long run to send you back to New York. In Paris, I was stuck with you. You see, I don't pretend that I was altruistic. Perhaps, thought Herzog, the sight of me frightened him. Have I changed even more than he has? Was Nachman horrified to see Moses? But we did play in the street together. I learned the alphabet from your father, Reb Shika. Nachman's family lived in the yellow tenement just opposite. 5 years old, Moses crossed Napoleon Street, up the wooden staircase with slanted warped treads. Cats shrank into corners or bolted softly upstairs. Their dry turds crumbled in the darkness with a spicy odor. Reb Shika had a yellow color. Mongolian, a tiny handsome man. He wore a black satin skullcap, a mustache like Lenin's. His narrow chest was clad in a winter undershirt, penman's woolens. The Bible lay open on the coarse table cover. Moses clearly saw the Hebrew characters. Demai, O Chico, the blood of thy brother. Yes, that was it. God speaking to Cain. Thy brother's blood cries out to me from the earth. At 8, Moses and Nachman shared a bench in the cellar of the synagogue. The pages of the Pentateuch smelled of mildew. The boys' sweaters were damp. The rabbi, short-bearded, his soft, big nose violently pitted with black, scolding them. You, Rozovich, you slacker. What does it say here about Potiphar's wife? Vetis pisayu bevigidi. And she took hold of what? Beged. A coat. A garment, you little thief. Mamzer, I'm sorry for your father. Some air he's got. Some Kaddish. Ham and pork you'll be eating before his body is in the grave. And you, Herzog, with those behemoth eyes. Vayazov, Bigdu, Bayodo. And he left it in her hands. Left what? Bigdu, the garment. You watch your step, Herzog, Moses. Your mother thinks you'll be a great lemdin, a rabbi. But I know you, how lazy you are. Mothers' hearts are broken by mamzerim like you. Eh? Do I know you, Herzog? Through and through? The only refuge was the WC, where the disinfectant camphor balls dwindled in the green through the urinal, and old men came down from the shul with webby eyes, nearly blind, sighing, grumbling, snatches of liturgy, as they waited for the water to come. Urine-rusted brass, scaly green, in an open stall, pants dropped to his feet, sat Nachum playing the harmonical. It's a long, long way to Tipperary. Love sends a little gift of roses. The peak of his cap was warped. You heard the saliva in the cells of the tin instrument, as he sucked and blew. The bowler-hatted elders washed their hands, gave their beards a finger-combing. Moses observed them. Almost certainly, Nachman ran away from the powder of his old friend's memory. Herzog persecuted everyone with it. It was like a terrible engine. Last time we met, how many years ago was that? I went with you to visit Laura. Laura was then in an insane asylum. Herzog and Nachman had transferred at 6 or 7 corners. It was 1,000 bus stops out on Long Island. In the hospital, the women in green cotton dresses wandered in the corridors on soft shoes, murmuring. Laura had bandaged wrists. It was her 3rd suicide attempt that Moses knew of. She sat in a corner, holding her breast in her arms, wanting to talk of French literature only. Her face was moony, lips, however, moving quickly. Moses had to agree with what he understood nothing of, the shape of Valerie's images. Then he and Nachman left toward sunset. They crossed the cement yard after an autumn rainfall. From the building, a crowd of ghosts in green uniforms watched the visitors depart. Laura, at the grill, raised her taped wrist, a wan hand. "Goodbye." Her long, thin mouth silently said, "Goodbye, goodbye." The straight hair fell beside her cheeks, a stiff, childish figure with female swellings. Nachman was hoarsely saying, "My innocent darling, my bride. They've put her away, the grim ones, the Machers, our masters, imprisoned her, as if to love me proved she was mad. But I shall be strong enough to protect our love," said gaunt, furrowed Nachman. His cheeks were sunken. Under the eyes his skin was yellow. "Why does she keep trying to kill herself?" said Moses. "The persecution of her family. What do you think? The bourgeois world of Westchester. Wedding announcements, linens, charge accounts. That was what her mother and father expected of her. But this is a pure soul that understands only pure things. She is a stranger here. The family only wants to part us. In New York we were wanderers too. When I came back, thanks to you, and I'll repay you, I'll work. We didn't have money to rent a room. How could I take a job? Who would look after her? So friends gave us shelter, food, a cot to live down, to make love." Herzog was very curious, but he merely said, "Oh?" "I wouldn't tell anyone but you, old friend. He had to take care. In our ecstasies, we had to warn each other to be more moderate. It was like a holy act. We mustn't make the gods jealous." Nachman spoke in a throbbing, droning voice. "Goodbye, my blessed spirit, my dear one, goodbye." He blew kisses at the window with painful sweetness. On the way to the bus, he went on lecturing in his unreal way, fervent and dull. So back of it all is bourgeois America. This is a crude world of finery and excrement, a proud, lazy civilization that worships its own boorishness. You and I were brought up in the old poverty. I don't know how American you've become since the old days in Canada. You've lived here a long time. But I will never worship the fat gods. Not I. I'm no Marxist, you know. I keep my heart with William Blake and Rilke. But a man like Laura's father, you understand, Las Vegas, Miami Beach, they wanted Laura to catch a husband at the Fontainebleau, a husband with money. At the edge of doom, beside the last grave of mankind, they will still be counting their paper, praying over their balance sheets. Nachman went on with boring, persistent power. He had lost teeth, and his jaw was smaller. His gray cheeks were bristly. Herzog could still see him as he had been at 6. In fact, he could not dismiss his visions of the two Nachmans side by side. And it was the child with his fresh face, the smiling gap in the front teeth, the button blouse on the short pants that was real, not this gaunt apparition of crazy lecturing Nachum. "Perhaps," he was saying, "people wish life to end. They have polluted it. Courage, honor, frankness, friendship, duty all made filthy, sullied. So that we loathe the daily bread that prolongs useless existence. There was a time when men were born, lived, and died. But do you call these men? We are only creatures. Death himself must be tired of us. I can see death coming before God to say, 'What shall I do? There is no more grandeur in being death. Release me, God, from this meanness.'" It isn't as bad as you make out, Nachman, Moses remembered answering. Most people are unpoetical, and you consider this a betrayal. Well, childhood friend, you have learned to accept a mixed condition of life. But I have had visions of judgment. I see mainly the obstinacy of cripples. We do not love ourselves, but persist in stubbornness. Each man is stubbornly himself. Above all, himself, to the end of time. Each of these creatures has some secret quality, and for this quality he is prepared to do anything. He will turn the universe upside down, but he will not deliver his quality to anyone else. Sooner let the world turn to drifting powder. This is what my poems are about. You don't think highly of my new psalms. You're blind, old friend. Maybe. But a good man, Moses, rooted in yourself, but a good heart, like your mother, a gentle spirit. You got it from her. I was hungry and she fed me. She washed my hands and sat me at the table. That I remember. She was the only one who was kind to my uncle, Ravitch, the drunkard. I sometimes say a prayer for her. Yiskor Elohim es nishmas imi, the soul of my mother. She's been dead a long time. And I pray for you, Moses. The bus on giant tires advanced through sunset-colored puddles, over leaves, ailanthus twigs. Its route was interminable through the low, brick, suburban, populous vastness. But 15 years later, on 8th Street, Nachman ran away. He looked old, derelict, stooped, crooked as he sprinted to the cheese shop. Where is my wife? He must have beat it to avoid explanations. His mad sense of decency told him to shun such an encounter. Or has he forgotten everything? Or would he be glad to forget it? But I, with my memory, all the dead and the mad are in my custody, and I am the nemesis of the would-be forgotten. I bind others to my feelings and oppress them. Was Ravitch actually your uncle, or only a lanceman? I was never certain. Ravitch boarded with the Herzogs on Napoleon Street, like a tragic actor of the Yiddish stage, with a straight drunken nose and a bowler pressing on the veins of his forehead. Ravitch, in an apron, worked at the fruit store near Rachel Street in 1922. There at the market, in zero weather, he was sweeping a mixed powder of sawdust and snow. The window was covered with large ferns of frost, and against it pressed the piled blood oranges and russet apples. And that was melancholy Ravitch, red with drink and cold. The project of his life was to send for his family, a wife and 2 children who were still in Russia. He'd have to find them first, for they were lost during the revolution. Now and then he soberly cleaned himself up and went to the Hebrew Immigrants Aid Society to make an inquiry, but nothing ever happened. He drank his pay, a shekel. No one judged himself more harshly. When he came out of the saloon, he stood wavering in the street, directing traffic, falling among the horses and trucks in the slush. The police were tired of throwing him in the drunk tank. They brought him home to Herzog's hallway and pushed him in. Ravitch, late at night, sang on the freezing stairs in a sobering voice. Eileen, 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 Allen via Shettin, mit diesen Finger Eileen. John Herzog got out of bed and turned on the light in the kitchen, listening. He wore a Russian sleeping suit of linen with a pleated front. the last of his gentleman's wardrobe, from Petersburg. The stove was out, and Moses in the same bed with Willie and Shira sat up, the three of them, under the lumpy wads of the quilt, looking at their father. He stood under the bulb, which had a spike at the end like a German helmet. The large loose twist of tungsten filament blazed. Annoyed and pitying, Father Herzog, with his round head and brown moustache, looked upward. The straight groove between his eyes came and went. He nodded and mused. Alone, 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 solitary as a stone, with my 10 fingers alone. Mother Herzog spoke from her room. Yona, help him in. All right, said Father Herzog, but he waited. Yona, it's a pity. Pity on us, too, said Father Herzog. Damn it! You're asleep, you're free from misery a while, and he wakes you up. A Jewish drunkard. He can't even do that right. Why can't he be fröhlich and cheerful when he drinks, eh? No, he has to cry and tear your heartstrings. Well, curse him, half laughing. Father Herzog cursed the heartstrings, too. It's enough that I have to rent a room to a miserable shicker. I'll taster ponecchio, mimeni. I'm broke without a penny. Do not hide thy countenance from us, Vic, nobody can deny. Ravage, tuneless and persistent, cried in the black frozen staircase. O'Brien, lo mer trinkin e glessivel vian, al taster ponecco mamini. I'm broke without a penny, Vic, nobody can deny. Father Herzog, silent and wry, laughed under his breath. Yona, I beg you. Genug schon. Oh, give him time. Why should I schlep out my guts? He'll wake the whole street. He'll be covered with vomit, his pants filled. But he went on. He pitied Ravitch, too, though Ravitch was one of the symbols of his changed condition. In Petersburg, there were servants. In Russia, Father Herzog had been a gentleman, with forged papers of the first guild. But many gentlemen lived on forged papers. The children still gazed into the empty kitchen, the black cook stove against the wall extinct, the double gas ring connected by rubber pipe to the meter. A Japanese reed mat protected the wall from cooking stains. It amused the boy to hear how their father coaxed drunken Ravitch to get on his feet. It was family theater. Nudlanst men. Can't you walk? It's freezing. Now get your crooked feet on the step. Schneller! Schneller! He cried with his bare breath. Well, I think we'll leave your dreckish pants out here. Phew! The boys pressed together in the cold, smiling. Papa supported him through the kitchen. Ravitch, in his filthy drawers and red face, dropped hands, the bowler, the drunken grief of his closed eyes. As for my mate, unlucky father, J. Herzog, he was not a bit big man, one of the small-boned Herzogs, finely made, round-headed, keen, nervous, handsome. In his frequent burst of temper he slapped his son swiftly with both hands. He did everything quickly, neatly, with skillful Eastern European flourishes, combing his hair, buttoning his shirt, stropping his bone-handled razors, sharpening pencils on the ball of his thumb, holding a loaf of bread to his breast and slicing towards himself, tying parcels with tight little knots, jotting like an artist in his account book. There each cancelled page was covered with a carefully drawn X. The ones and the sevens carried bars and streamers. They were like pennants in the wind of failure. First, Father Herzog failed in Petersburg, where he went through 2 dowries in 1 year. He had been importing onions from Egypt under Pobedonostsev. Pobedonostsev, the police caught up with him for illegal residence. He was convicted and sentenced. The account of the trial was published in a Russian journal printed on thick green paper. Father Herzog sometimes unfolded it and read aloud to the entire family, translating the proceedings against Ilyona Isakovich Herzog. He never served his sentence. He got away because he was nervy, hasty, obstinate, rebellious. He came to Canada, where his sister, Zephora Yaffe, was living. In 1913, he bought a piece of land near Valleyfield, Quebec, and failed as a farmer. Then he came into town and failed as a baker, failed in the dry goods business, failed as a jobber, failed as a sack manufacturer in the war, when no one else failed. He failed as a junk dealer. Then he became a marriage broker and failed, too short-tempered and blunt. And now he was failing as a bootlegger, on the run from the Provincial Liquor Commission, making a bit of a living. In haste and defiantly, with a clear, tense face, walking with mingled desperation and high style, a little awkwardly, dropping his weight on one heel as he went. His coat, once lined with fox, turned dry and bald, the red hide cracking, his coat sweeping open as he walked, or marched his one-man Jewish march. He was saturated with the odor of the caporals he smoked as he covered Montreal in his swing. Papineau, Mill End, Verdun, Lachine, Point Street, Charles, Point St. Charles. He looked for business opportunities, bankruptcies, job lots, mergers, fire sales, produce, to rescue him from illegality. He could calculate percentages mentally at high speed, but he lacked the cheating imagination of a successful businessman. And so he kept a little still in Mile End, where goats fed in the empty lots. He traveled on the tram car. He sold the bottle here and there and waited for his main chance. American rum runners would buy the stuff from you at the border, any amount, spot cash, if you could get it there. Meanwhile, he smoked cigarettes on the cold platforms of streetcars. The revenue was trying to catch him. Spotters were after him. On the roads to the border were hijackers. On Napoleon Street, he had 5 mouths to feed. Willie and Moses were sickly. Helen studied the piano. Shura was fat, greedy, disobedient. A plodding boy. The rent, back rent, notes due, doctor's bills to pay. And he had no English, no friends, no influence, no trade, no assets, but his still. No help in all the world. His sister Zephora, in St. Anne, was rich, very rich, which only made matters worse. Grandfather Herzog was still alive then, with the instinct of a Herzog for the grand thing. He took refuge in the Winter Palace in 1918. The Bolsheviks allowed it for a while. The old man wrote long letters in Hebrew. He had lost his precious books in an upheaval. Study was impossible now. In the Winter Palace, you had to walk up and down all day to find a minion. Of course, there was hunger too. Later, he predicted that the revolution would fail and tried to acquire Tsarist currency to become a millionaire under the restored Romanovs. The Herzogs received packets of worthless rubles, and Willie and Moses played with great sums. You held the glorious bills to the light, and you saw Peter the Great and Catherine in the watermarked rainbow paper,
Grandfather Herzog was in his 80s but still strong. His mind was powerful and his Hebrew calligraphy elegant. The letters were read aloud in Montreal by Father Herzog. Accounts of cold, lice, famine, epidemics, the dead. The old man wrote, "Shall I ever see the faces of my children? And who will bury me?" Father Herzog approached the next phrase 2 or 3 times, but could not find his full voice. Only a whisper came out. The tears were in his eyes, and he suddenly put his hand over his mustached mouth and hurried from the room. Mother Herzog, large-eyed, sat with the children in the primitive kitchen, which the son never entered. It was like a cave with the ancient black stove, the iron sink, the green cupboards, the gas ring. Mother Herzog had a way of meeting the present with a partly averted face. She encountered it on the left, but sometimes seemed to avoid it on the right. On this withdrawn side she often had a dreaming look, melancholy, and seemed to be seeing the old world, her father, the famous Misnagid, her tragic mother, her brothers living and dead, her sister and her linens and servants in Petersburg, the Dacha in Finland, all founded on Egyptian onions. Now she was cook, washerwoman, seamstress on Napoleon Street in the slum. Her hair turned gray, and she lost her teeth. Her very fingernails wrinkled. Her hands smelled of the sink. Herzog was thinking, however, how she found the strength to spoil her children. She certainly spoiled me. Once, at nightfall, she was pulling me on the sled over crusty ice, the tiny glitter of snow, perhaps 4 o'clock of a short day in January. Near the grocery we met an old Baba in a shawl, who said, "Why are you pulling him, daughter?" Mamma, dark under the eyes, her slender cold face. She was breathing hard. She wore the torn seal coat and a red pointed wool cap and thin button boots. Clusters of dry fish hung in the shop, a rancid sugar smell, cheese, soap, a terrible dust of nutrition came from the open door. The bell on a coil of wire was bobbing, ringing. "Daughter, don't sacrifice your strength to children," said the shawled crone in the freezing dusk of the street. I wouldn't get off the sled. I pretended not to understand. One of life's hardest jobs, to make a quick understanding slow. I think I succeeded, thought Herzog. Mamma's brother, Mikhail, died of typhus in Moscow. I took the letter from the postman and brought it upstairs. The long latch string ran through loops under the banister. It was wash day. The copper boiler steamed the window. She was rinsing and wringing in the tub. When she read the news, she gave a cry and fainted. Her lips turned white. Her arm lay in the water, sleeve and all. The two were alone in the house. I was terrified. When she lay like that, legs spread, her hair undone, lids brown, mouth bloodless, deathlike. But then she got up and went to lie down. She wept all day. But in the morning she cooked the oatmeal. Nevertheless, we were up early. My ancient times, remoter than Egypt. No dawn, the foggy winters. In darkness the bulb was lit. The stove was cold. Papa shook the grates and raised an ashen dust. The grates grumbled and squealed. The puny shovel clinked underneath. The caporals gave Papa a bad cough. The chimneys, in their helmets, sucked in the wind. Then the milkman came in his sleigh. The snow was spoiled and rotten with manure and litter, dead rats, dogs. The milkman, in his sheepskin, gave the bell a twist. It was brass, like the winding key of a clock. Helen pulled the latch and went down with a pitcher for the milk. And then,
Ravitch, hungover, came from his room in his heavy sweater suspenders over the wool to keep it tighter to the body, the bowler on his head. Red in the face, his look guilty. He waited to be asked to sit. The morning light could not free itself from gloom and frost. Up and down the street, the brick recessed windows were dark, filled with darkness, and schoolgirls by twos in their black skirts marched toward the Covenant, and wagons, sledges, drays, and horses shuddering, the air drowned in leaden green, the dung-stained ice trails of ashes. Moses and his brothers put on their caps and prayed together. Ma tuvu, O Aliyah Yaakov. How goodly are thy tents, O Israel. Napoleon Street rotten, toy-like, crazy and filthy, riddled with flogged with harsh weather. The bootleggers' boys reciting ancient prayers. To this, Moses' heart was attached with great power. Here was a wider range of human feelings than he had ever again been able to find. Gee, you don't say. The children of the race, by a never-failing miracle, opened their eyes on one strange world after another, age after age, and uttered the same prayer in each, eagerly loving what they found. What was wrong with Napoleon Street? Thought Herzog. All he ever wanted was there. His mother did the wash and mourned. His father was desperate and frightened, but obstinately fighting. His brother, Shura, with staring, disingenuous eyes, was plotting to master the world, to become a millionaire. His brother Willie struggled with asthmatic fits. Trying to breathe, he gripped the table and rose on his toes like a cock about to crow. His sister Helen had long white gloves, which she washed in thick suds. She wore them to their lessons at the conservatory, carrying a leather music roll. Her diploma hung in a frame. Millie, Helene, Herzog, avec distinction. His soft-prim sister who played the piano. On a summer night, she sat playing, and the clear notes went through the window into the street. The square-shouldered piano had a velveteen runner, mossy green, as though the lid of the piano were a slab of stone. From the runner hung a ball fringe, like hickory nuts. Moses stood behind Helen, staring at the swirling pages of Haydn and Mozart, wanting to whine like a dog. Oh, the music, thought Herzog. He fought the insidious blight of nostalgia in New York, softening, heart-rotting emotions, black spots, sweet for one moment, but leaving a dangerous acid residue. Helen played. She wore a midi and pleated skirt, and her pointed shoes cramped down on the pedals. A proper, vain girl. She frowned while she played. Her father's crease appeared between her eyes, frowning as though she performed a dangerous action. The music rang into the street. Aunt Zephora was critical of this music business. Helen was not a genuine musician. She played to move the family, perhaps to attract a husband. What Aunt Zephora opposed was Mama's ambition for her children, because she wanted them to be lawyers, gentlemen, rabbis, or performers. All branches of the family had the caste madness of Yichus. No life so barren and subordinate that it didn't have imaginary dignities, honors to come, freedom to advance. Zephora wanted to hold Mama back, Moses concluded, and she blamed Papa's failure in America on these white gloves and piano lessons. Zephora had a strong character. She was witty, grudging, at war with everyone. Her face was flushed and thin, her nose shapely but narrow and grim. She had a critical, damaging nasal voice. Her hips were large, and she walked with wide, heavy steps. A braid of thick, glossy hair hung down her back. Now, Uncle Yaffe, Zephyrah's husband, was quiet-spoken, humorously reserved. He was a small man but strong. His shoulders were wide, and he wore a black beard like King George V. It grew tight and curly on his brown face. The bridge of his nose was dented. His teeth were broad, and one was capped with gold. Moses had smelled the tart flavor of his uncle's breath as they played checkers. Over the board, Uncle Yaffe's broad head, with short black twisted hair, a bit bald, was slightly unsteady. He had a mild nervous tremor. Uncle Yaffe, from the past, seemed to find out his nephew at this very instant of time, and to look at him with the brown eyes of an intelligent, feeling, satirical animal. His glance glittered shrewdly, and he smiled with twisted satisfaction at the errors of young Moses, affectionately giving me the business. In Yaffe's junkyard in St. Anne, the ragged cliffs of scrap metal bled rust into the puddles. There was sometimes a line of scavengers at the gate, kids, greenhorns, old Irishwomen or Ukrainians, and redmen from the Conawaga reservation came with push carts and little wagons, bringing bottles, rags, old plumbing or electrical fixtures, hardware, paper tires, bones to sell. The old man, in his brown cardigan, stooped, and his strong, trembling hands sorted out what he had bought. Without straightening his back, he could pitch pieces of scrap where they belonged. Iron here, zinc there, copper left, lead right, and Babbitt metal by the shed. He and his sons made money during the war. Aunt Zephyrah bought real estate. She collected rents. Moses knew that she carried a bankroll in her bosom. He had seen it. "Well, you lost nothing by coming to America," Papa said to her. Her first reply was to stare sharply and warningly at him. Then she said, "It's no secret how we started out. By labor. Yaffe took a pick and shovel on the CPR until we saved up a little capital. But no, you were born in a silk shirt." With a glance at Mama, she went on, "You got used to putting on style in Petersburg with servants and coachmen. I can still see you getting off the train from Halifax, all dressed up among the greeners. Gott Manor. Ostrich feathers, taffeta skirts, greenhorns mit Strauss Jadern. Now forget the feathers, the gloves. Now." "That seems like 1,000 years ago," said Mamma. "I have forgotten all about servants. I am the servant. Die Diens bin ich. Everyone must work, not suffer your whole life long from a fall. Why must your children go on to the conservatory, the Baron de Hirsch school, and all those special frills? Let them go to work, like mine." "She doesn't want the children to become common," said Papa. "My sons are not common. They know a page of Gemara, too. And don't forget, we come from the greatest Hasidic rabbis, Reb Jusia, Herschel, Dubrovner. Just remember." "No one is saying," said Mamma, "to haunt the past like this, to love the dead." Moses warned himself not to yield so greatly to the temptation, this peculiar weakness of his character. He was a depressive. Depressives cannot surrender childhood, not even the pains of childhood. He understood the hygiene of the matter, but somehow his heart had come open at this chapter of his life, and he didn't have the strength to shut it. So it was again a winter day in St. Anne in 1923. At Zephyrah's kitchen, Zephyrah wore a crimson crepe de chine wrapper. Discernible underneath were voluminous yellow bloomers and a man's undershirt. She sat beside the kitchen oven, her face flushing. Her nasal voice often rose to a barbed little cry of irony, of false dismay, of terrible humor. Then she remembered what Mamma's brother, Mikhail, was dead, and she said, "Well, about your brother, what was the matter?" "We don't know," said Papa. "Who can imagine what a black year they're making back home?" It was always Inderheim, Herzog reminded himself. A mob broke into his house, cut open everything, looking for valuta. Afterwards he caught typhus, or God knows what. Mamma's hand was over her eyes, as though she were shading them. She said nothing. "I remember what a fine man he was," said Uncle Yaffe. "May he have a Lichtigen Gan Eden." Aunt Zephyrah, who believed in the power of curses, said, "Curse those Bolsheviks. They want to make the world Horav. May their hands and feet wither." "But where are Mikhail's wife and children?" "No one knows. The letter came from a cousin, Svirling, who saw Mikhail in the hospital. He barely recognized him." Zephyrah said a few more pious things, and then, in a more normal manner, she added, "Well, he was an active fellow, had plenty of money in his time. Who knows what a fortune he brought back from South Africa?" "He shared with us," said Mamma. "My brother had an open hand. It came easily," said Zephyrah. "It's not as if he had to work hard for it." "How do you know?" said Father Herzog. "Don't let your tongue run away with you, my sister." But Zephyrah couldn't be restrained now. "He made money out of those miserable black Kaffirs." "Who knows how?" "So you had a dacha in Shavalovo. Yaffe was away in the service in the Kavkaz. I had a sick child to nurse, and you, Yona, were running around Petersburg spending 2 dowries. Yes, you lost the first 10,000 rubles in a month. He gave you another 10. I can't say what else he was doing, with Tartars, gypsies, whores, eating horse meat, and God only knows what abominations went on." "What kind of malice is in you?" said Father Herzog, angry. "I have nothing against Mikhail. He never harmed me." Zephyrah said, "But he was a brother who gave, so I am a sister who doesn't give." "No one said it," Father Herzog said. "But if the shoe fits, you can wear it." Engrossed, unmoving in his chair, Herzog listened to the dead at their dead quarrels. "What do you expect?" said Zephyrah. "With 4 children, if I started to give and indulge your bad habits, it would be endless. It's not my fault you're a pauper here. I'm a pauper in America, that's true. Look at me. I haven't got a copper to bless my naked skin. I shouldn't pay for my own shroud." "Blame your own weak nature," said Zephyrah. "As du hast a schwachen Nature, where is der schuldig? You can't stand alone. You leaned on Saro's brother, and now you want to lean on me." Yaffe served in the Kavets, a Finsternish. It was too cold for dogs to howl. Alone, he came to America, and sent for me. But you want alles 7 Glicken. You travel in style with ostrich feathers. You're an edel Mensch. Get your hands dirty. Not you. It's true, I didn't shovel manure in der Ham. That happened in the land of Columbus. But I did it. I learned to harness a horse. At 3 o'clock in the morning, 20 below in the stable. Zifra waved this aside. And now with your still. You had to escape from the Tsar's police, and now the revenue. And you have to have a partner, a Gornev. Vaplonsky is an honest man. Who? That German? Vaplonsky was a Polish blacksmith. She called him a German because of his pointed military mustaches and the German cut of his overcoat. It hung to the ground. What have you in common with a blacksmith? You, a descendant of Herschel Dubrovner, and he, a Polisher Schmidt with red whiskers. A rat with pointed red whiskers, and long crooked teeth, and reeking of scorched hoof. Bah, your partner. Wait and see what he does to you. I'm not so easy to take in. No? Didn't Lazansky swindle you? He gave it to you in the real Turkish style. And didn't he beat your bones also? That was Lazansky, in the bakery, a giant teamster from the Ukraine, a huge ignorant man, an Amhoritz, who didn't know enough Hebrew to bless his beard, bless his bread. He sat on his narrow green delivery wagon, ponderous, growling, "Grupp," to his little nag, and flicking with the whip. His gross voice rolled like a bowling ball. The horse trotted along the bank of the Lachine Canal. The wagon was lettered Lazansky, Patisseries de Choi. Father Herzog said, "Yes, it's true, he beat me." He had come to borrow money from Zifra and Yaffe. He did not want to be drawn into a quarrel. She had certainly guessed the purpose of his visit, and was trying to make him angry so that she might refuse him more easily. "Aye," said Zifra, a brilliantly shrewd woman. Her many gifts were cramped in this little Canadian village. "You think you can make a fortune out of swindlers, thieves, and gangsters? You're a gentle creature. I don't know why you didn't stay in the yeshiva. You wanted to be a gilded little gentleman. I know these hooligans and razbuniks. They don't have skins, teeth, fingers like you, but hides, fangs, claws. You can never keep up with these teamsters and butchers. Can you shoot a man?" Father Herzog was silent. "If, God forbid, you had to shoot," cried Zifra, "could you even hit someone on the head? Come, think it over. Answer me, Goslin. Could you give a blow on the head?" Where Mother Herzog seemed to agree. Here Mother Herzog seemed to agree. "I'm no weakling," said Father Herzog, with his energetic face and brown mustache. But of course, thought Herzog, all of Papa's violence went into the drama of his life, into family strife and sentiment. "They'll take what they like from you, those laity," said Zifra. "Now, isn't it time you used your head? You do have one klug bis due. Make a legitimate living. Let your Helen and your Shura go to work. Sell the piano. Cut expenses. Why shouldn't the children study if they have intelligence, talent?" said Mother Herzog. "If they're smart, all the better for my brother," said Zifra. "It's too hard for him wearing himself out for spoiled princes and princesses." She had Papa on her side then. His craving for help was deep bottomless. "Not that I don't love children," said Zifra. "Come here, little Moses, and sit on your old tante's knee. What a dear little Yingale." Moses, on the bloomers of his aunt's lap, her red hands held him at the belly. She smiled with harsh affection, and kissed his neck. "Born in my arms, this child." Then she looked at Brother Shura, who stood beside his mother. He had thick, blocky legs, and his face was freckled. "And you," said Zifra to him. "What's wrong?" said Shura, frightened and offended. Not too young to bring in $1. Papa glared at Shura. Don't I help? Said Shura. Deliver bottles, paste labels. Papa had forged labels. He would say cheerfully, Well, children, what shall it be? White Horse? Johnny Walker? Then we'd all call out our favorites. The paste pot was on the table. In secret, Mother Herzog touched Shura's hand when Zifra turned her eyes on him. Moses saw breathless Willie was scampering outside with his cousins, building a snow fort, squeaking and throwing snowballs. The sun came lower and lower. Ribbons of red from the horizon wound over the ridges of glazed snow. In the blue shadow of the fence, the goats were feeding. They belonged to the seltzer man next door. Zifra's chickens were about to roost. Visiting us in Montreal, she sometimes brought a fresh egg. One egg, one of the children might be sick. A fresh egg had a world of power. Nervous and critical, with awkward feet and heavy hips, she mounted the stairs on Napoleon Street, a stormy woman, a daughter of fate. Quickly and nervously, she kissed her fingertips and touched the mezuzah. Entering, she inspected Mamma's housekeeping. Is everybody well? She said. I brought the children an egg. She opened her big bag and took out the present, wrapped in a piece of Yiddish newspaper. Der Kanader Adler. A visit from Tante Zefira was like a military inspection. Afterwards, Mamma laughed and often ended by crying. Why is she my enemy? What does she want? I have no strength to fight her. The antagonism, as Mamma felt it, was mystical, a matter of souls. Mamma's mind was archaic, filled with old legends and angels and demons. Of course, Zefira, that realist, was right to refuse Father Herzog. He wanted to run bootleg whiskey to the border and get into the big time. He and Voplonsky borrowed from moneylenders and loaded a truck with cases, but they never reached Rouse's Point. They were hijacked, beaten up, and left in a ditch. Father Herzog took the worst beating because he resisted. The hijackers tore his clothes, knocked out one of his teeth, and trampled him. He and Voplonsky, the blacksmith, returned to Montreal on foot. He stopped at Voplonsky's shop to clean up, but there was not much he could do about his swollen, bloody eye. He had a gap in his teeth, his coat was torn, and his shirt and undergarment were blood-stained. That was how he entered the dark kitchen on Napoleon Street. We were all there. It was gloomy, March, and anyway, the light seldom reached that room. It was like a cavern. We were like cave dwellers. Sarah, he said. Children. He showed his cut face. He spread his arms so we could see his tatters and the white of his body under them. Then he turned his pockets inside out, empty. As he did this, he began to cry, and the children standing about him all cried. It was more than I could bear, that anyone should lay violent hands on him. A father, a sacred being, a king. Yes, he was a king to us. My heart was suffocated by this horror. I thought I would die of it. Whom did I ever love as I loved them? Then Father Herzog told his story. They were waiting for us. The road was blocked. They dragged us from the truck. They took everything. Why did you fight? Said Mother Herzog. Everything we had. All I borrowed. They might have killed you. They had handkerchiefs over their faces. I thought I recognized. Mamma was incredulous. Lenzfleet. Impossible. No Jews could do this to a Jew. No? Cried Papa. Why not? Who says not? Why shouldn't they? Not Jews. Never, Mamma said. Never, never. They couldn't have the heart. Never. Children don't cry, and poor Voplonsky, he could barely creep into bed. Jonah, said Mommy. You must give up this whole thing. How will we live? We have to live. He began to tell the story of his life from childhood to this day. He wept as he told it. Put out at 4 years old to study away from home, eaten by lice, half starved in the yeshiva as a boy. He shaved, became a modern European. He worked in Kremenchug for his aunt as a young man. He had a fool's paradise in Petersburg for 10 years, on forged papers. Then he sat in prison with common criminals, escaped to America, starved, cleaned stables, begged, lived in fear, a bel chov, always a debtor, shadowed by the police, taking in drunken boarders, his wife a servant. And this was what he brought home to his children. This was what he could show them. His rags, his bruises. Herzog, wrapped in his cheap paisley robe, brooded with clouded eyes. Under his bare feet was a small strip of carpet. His elbows rested on the fragile desk, and his head hung down. He had written only a few lines to Nachman. I suppose he was thinking that we heard this tale of the Herzogs 10 times a year. Sometimes Mama told it, sometimes he. So we had a great schooling in grief. I still know these cries of the soul. They lie in the breast and in the throat. The mouth wants to open wide and let them out. But all these are antiquities. Yes, Jewish antiquities, originating in the Bible, in the biblical sense of personal experience and destiny. What happened during the war abolished Father Herzog's claim to exceptional suffering. We are on a more brutal standard now, a new terminal standard, indifferent to persons, part of the program of destruction into which the human spirit has poured itself with energy, even with joy. These personal histories, old tales from old times that may not be worth remembering. I remember, I must, but who else? To whom can this matter? So many millions, multitudes go down in terrible pain, and at that moral suffering is denied these days. Personalities are good only for comic relief. But I am still a slave to Papa's pain, the way Father Herzog spoke of himself. That could make one laugh. His I had such dignity. You must give it up, Mama cried. You must. What should I do then? Work for the burial society, like a man of 70, only fit to sit at deathbeds? I wash corpses, I? Or should I go to the cemetery and wheedle mourners for a nickel, to say El Malay Rakamin? I. Let the earth open and swallow me up. Come, Jonah, said Mamma, in her earnest, persuasive way. I'll put a compass on your eye. Come lie down. How can I? No, you must. How will the children eat? Come, you must lie down a while. Take off that shirt. She sat by the bed, silent. He lay in the grey room, on the iron bedstead, covered with the worn red Russian blanket, his handsome forehead, his level nose, the brown moustache, as he had from that dark corridor. Moses now contemplated those two figures. Nachum, he began again to write, but stopped. How was he to reach Nachum with a letter? He would do better to advertise in the Village Voice. But then, to whom would he send the other letters he was drafting? He concluded that Nachman's wife was dead. Yes, that must be it. That slender, thin-legged girl, with the dark brows, that rose high and recurved again beside her eyes, and the wide mouth which curved down at the corners. She had committed suicide, and Nachman ran away because who could blame him? He would have had to tell Moses all about it. Poor thing. Poor thing. She too must be in the cemetery.